But sometimes people ask for it, so then I just have to. Oh no, I stopped the recording. Oh, sorry. Okay. Transcription is stopped. Okay, I was still no, so I'm recording. Okay. Welcome. So let me put on my camera. So just for a moment. So welcome. It's nice to welcome those of you online. There's a couple of in class as well. So it's very nice also to welcome you to this postgraduate seminar. So today we have one of our third year students, Hans Lange, who wrote this paper together with his lecturer at Ancient Studies. It's Andrason, yeah, so Professor Andrason. And it's a paper also on Aramaic, and yeah, so it was published, so fantastic, you know, wonderful way to build your CV also, and it was so Hans asked if he could also present it and to our colleagues, and I thought that this is fantastic, so I'm so glad that you'll be able to present to us today. Welcome to those of you who from all over, some former students, current students, for Lola, our postdoc. So, she was our postdoc, she's now a researcher in the gender unit. So, so Hans, I will give over to you. Hopefully you can all see his screen. So, I'm gonna leave on the camera so that they can also see you. And then if you're done, so we can, so I'll lead the conversation. Okay, so there you go, Hans.
Thank you so much, Prof. Klaassen.
Yes.
And so performatives in Biblical Aramaic. Now, here's a sentence that you won't expect. I hereby declare that pizza belongs on pineapple. No, that pineapple belongs on pizza. And so I know I'm edging into very controversial topics here, which has two camps of very strong opinions. But this is actually an example of what we were investigating in this paper, which is a performative. And I'll get to a definition later on, but we'll use this sentence to sort of explain our framework that we were using. So just a quick overview. We'll talk about the research question, the framework that we used, launch into the evidence, the discussion, and what we concluded from this question. So obviously, oh, did someone say research? We get excited. It's about Biblical Aramaic, specifically the books of Daniel and Ezra, and the word category of a performative. And what's not so obvious is that there's actually no study dedicated to performatives per se. There are references in other grammars and other works, but no one has studied performatives specifically. In the ancient and classical North Semitic languages, there's two grams that are being used as performatives. That has been observed. So the suffix conjugation, so katal, and the active participle, kotel, well, those are the Hebrew equivalent. And what scholars have also observed is that there's a drift in the Northwest Semitic languages, so that in earlier forms, the suffix conjugation is used for the performatives, and that later on, the active participle is more widely used. So that has been documented. And we don't know about Aramaic, though, about Biblical Aramaic. So we need more research. And so our question was in this paper, to what extent has the active participle already replaced the suffix conjugation in Biblical Aramaic? So it's a very linguistic-orientated research question. Our framework now, so now we need to identify and define a performative in linguistic terms, is a two-pronged approach where we had an empirical foundation. So those are the cross-linguistic features that performatives have in all languages. And so we observed the regularities and features that performatives exhibit. and as well as the rational foundation. So how striking are these features? What part of these features actually make a performative? And so there's extra grammatical properties. So properties that you need to gather from the text. They're not linguistic per se, but they are obviously related to the language. So a performative uniquely and immediately brings about a change in the world. So something happens in the performative that changes the world. Like me declaring something. It's a point in time where something changes. Usually there's some procedure or a ritual. Like, for example, being married is also performative. I hereby declare you husband and wife. That's also performative. So, and as you can see in this marriage example, there's usually a pastor, there's a ritual. So it's something very formalized. And it's self-guaranteeing. So whoever does the performative actually means what they say. So we have to assume that the person is honest in what he says. And so let's look at my pizza example. I said, I hereby declare that pineapple belongs on pizza. So how does that shape up in terms of these properties? And so it brings a change about in the world as far as I have now declared such. So that would conform to our framework. But I'm by no means an adequate person to make that judgment. I'm not a chef, I'm not an Italian, so who am I to say that pineapple belongs on pizza? But I did mean what I said, because I do eat pineapple on pizza. And so my example would be somewhat canonical to this definition. The other features is that grammatically speaking now, so these are the more linguistic features, that of course, a performative is something, it's a unique point in time. It's the moment someone gets married. So it will use those grammatical constructions that express such boundedness, such punctiliar events. Usually, there's an adverb of I hereby declare, so this hereby is often accompanies the performatives of hiermee verklaar ek. And also with forms expressing simultaneity, so I hereby now declare, or here and now I declare, for example, and that the person who says it is actually the person who's in charge. So the person who utters the performative is the one who is in charge. So yeah, and then the last one is quite interesting and it's not so evident. So a performative is self-referring. So saying the performative is the performative itself. So by saying I hereby declare, I am declaring, the act of speech is the very act of the performative. So again, my pizza example. And so I hereby declare. Declaring is something that happens at one point in time. I declare. I use the word hereby. I hereby declare. So that also agrees with our framework here. And I was speaking in the first person singular. And declaring is a self-referring act. So the declarance is the declaration itself, if that makes any sense. And so this was our framework that we used. And so we went through the Biblical Aramaic corpus, comparing each instance of a performative that we saw to this framework. And what we found then is, well, first of all, we went through the scholarship of Biblical Aramaic and see which words have already been identified as performatives, whether they were accepted or rejected. We analyzed them all. And we searched 50 English translations for typical performative indications, such as looking for hereby or other related words. And we actually found 19 instances. Now, in linguistic terms, 19 is really not a lot. But in these old languages and texts that have been revised over and over again, it's highly unlikely that 19 instances would be a mistake. So these instances really do tell us something about the corpus. In Daniel, we found 9 different roots. And in Ezra, 9 instances and 6 roots. And in Ezra, we found 10 instances with only 3 roots. In Daniel, now it's interesting because now we're getting closer to our research question. We see that the active participle was used 7 times, the suffix conjugation only twice. Now in Ezra, we have the active participle twice and the suffix conjugation 8 times. So all of these examples, though, we compared to all the different features of our framework to see, well, how canonical are these examples? Are these really performatives per se? Can we include them in our discussion? And we found that of these 19 instances, all of them are unique and immediate, the first extra grammatical property. All instances are accompanied by procedure, but only some of them had sort of set ritual phrases, more in Ezra actually. And of all the performances, this was actually an assumption that we had to make, is that everything, all the speakers in the text mean what they say. Of course, it's not really possible to get behind the text in that way, but I think that's quite a reasonable assumption. All these constructions communicated a perfective aspect, so this pointilia point in time. There was usually no hereby, but the examples did communicate the immediateness of the action. We had mostly first person singular, but also some third person instances. And all of the examples were such self-referring acts that I mentioned earlier. So in terms of the suffix conjugation, it's attested 10 times, so 53% of all the instances with only 3 different roots. 7 times, so 7 of these 10 times, it's a king addressing his subjects. So that would be sort of a more formulaic speech because it's a person of higher power communicating with people of lesser power. For example, I, King Artaxerxes, issue a decree to all treasurers. So here he's issuing a decree. That's sim te em. That word sim, that's the performative, issuing a decree. And interestingly, also 7 times the passive variant of the suffix conjugation is used, and 3 times the active variant. 3 different roots. So basically, all what that indicates is that 7 times when the passive is used of the performative, there's only 2 roots that actually are used in this. So that indicates that there's an expression that has become more formulaic, while as the active variant is each time a different root. So it's more productive, not as formulaic. Yeah, formal, routinized, less productive in general, the suffix conjugation. The active participle, 9 times, 6 different roots. 5 times the king addresses God. The other times king addresses his subjects. Once a subject addresses a king, I think that was Daniel. And once a voice from heaven addresses the king. That's quite dramatic. So yeah, it is announced to you, King Nebuchadnezzar, your kingdom has departed from you. That is quite dramatic. I think that's the example, the last one. Yeah. So this is less formal. We have more different roots for a variety of uses. So it's a more productive use of the performative. Now it becomes interesting because we're looking at, well, what's the difference between Daniel and Ezra? And this is also interesting because this will actually indicate something about the dating of the books as well. So looking at it from a diachronic perspective, so we have the book of Ezra from the 4th century. We found 10 instances. 80% of those the suffix conjugation and 20% the active participle. And in Daniel, what we find, it's the other way around. We find more active participle and less suffix conjugation, and we actually also find more roots used. And so now we'd have to explain, well, what causes this change? I mean, we've already noted in the beginning that in the other Northwest Semitic languages, there is this drift from using the suffix conjugation to using the active participle. And this we explained by the phenomenon of grammaticalization, that the suffix conjugation, so the Karkatal form, started out as a resultative, and through use of time, now this is also a cross-linguistic phenomenon, is that the use of that form changes. It evolves into a present perfect and then into an old anterior, so more past tenses. So it changes from something resulting in something to referring to something that's actually happened in the past. The active participle, on the other hand, starts as a progressive or habitual form, so something that's ongoing, and from that actually evolves into being used into the present tense. And of course, if you think about it already, the performative wants to express this particular event in time, and so it would be expressed using those grammatical forms that actually lend themselves to that kind of expression. And yeah, that's basically what I said. The performative is concurrent. It is in the present. It's a change that's unique. So it's once off. It doesn't carry on. And so because of the grammaticalization path of these two grams in Aramaic, it would make sense actually that in the early stages of a language, the performative would be expressed using a suffix conjugation because it's a resultative. It's something that happens as a result of something in the point of time. It's no point in trying to express a performative with a tense that actually refers to something way back in the past. And on the other hand, the active participle, in the early stages of the languages, when it expresses something that carries on, it doesn't express that in the momentness of a performative. So obviously then, as it evolves, we can see here, that's what I indicated in green, is that in the early stages, the suffix conjugation lends itself more readily to the performative. And as it carries on, actually the active participle becomes the more likely candidate to be used. And so to come back to our research question, is to what extent has the active participle now supplanted the suffix conjugation? We can say that it's consistent with this drift that was observed in scholarship, and it's in an intermediary state, because you see Ezra has both active participle and suffix conjugation, and also Daniel has both, so it's not a completed shift. And so if you want to compare it to Qumran Aramaic, it's still less advanced. So Qumran Aramaic would have still evolved a bit further, according to this analysis. And yeah, and so clearly we can see that these grammaticalization paths would explain this shift from suffix conjugation to the active participle. And yeah, thank you for your time. Here's some memes about pizza. All right, yeah, thank you, everyone. If there's that's.
Don't go away, so you can answer some questions. Let's see. Yes, see my colleague Henrik Bosman also has joined. Thank you so much. You can sign. This is so from your peers here or online, any comments or questions? Thank you. It's a very clear presentation and, you know, interesting sort of presented as well. I have some things I want to say or ask you, but let me just hear online or from your friends here. Maybe people don't feel they want to say something about Aramaic, but I have things to ask. Is there maybe from the technical aspect, Bosi or for Lola? I'm trying to think of those of you who've had more sort of. I want to put you on the spot. Okay. So while they wait and think, then I'll maybe get us also conversation going. Thinking, oh, who's that?
I want to thank him for the presentation.
So for Lola, yes, have you muted? So Lola, just unmute yourself.
No, I was just thanking him for the presentation. Yeah, I'm unmuted.
Okay, yes, I hear you.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, yes.
Yes, I just wanted to thank him for the presentation and the attention that he has paid to the, and the careful attention he has paid to the syntax. That's very helpful and informative. So thank you very much, Mr. Lange.
So for Lola, I hope you heard that. So she said, thank you so much for the attention you paid also to the syntax. Oh. So she said she was in, and then also her previous life, she was a comparative literature sort of also, she was also teaching some of that. So yeah, so she's very sort of also to syntax, how language functions. She's also my co-editor and helped many students sort of write better. So I'm very deeply thankful for just her command of language also. And yeah, so she will appreciate that as well. Bosi, yes, Sleepy. We'd love to hear what you say.
Good afternoon. Unfortunately, I was caught in a traffic jam, so I only joined at a very late stage. So if my question is irrelevant in terms of what has already been discussed in the beginning, I would like to ask, since the emphasis is on the active participle, to what extent is the reflexive voice influenced by this progression which you have argued or seem to argue in your paper? So in other words, this betwixt and between active and passive, but the reflexive voice, which I think is very difficult also to ascertain within the so-called participle usage trying to express the present.
So you heard that. So Abira, welcome. Maybe you can just switch off your camera just to save bandwidth. You got the question?
I did get the question, and I wish I could adequately reply, but I'd have to go through all of our instances again and actually see how that reflexiveness would actually influence that progression. I don't think we paid much attention to that, but that's definitely a question I'll look at. Thanks for that.
Good. Okay, so I have a question. So what I was thinking about, so I think the whole notion of performative is so interesting also in a context of where people didn't feel that they had power, sort of powerlessness. So, both, Daniel and then Ezra. And even to say, we know in context where people feel profoundly out of control, you can say, hereby I declare, so you have suddenly some authority. Yeah. I found it very interesting also that the king, after the king and all the higher power, and that's also, resistance in terms of Daniel. Yeah. The fact that the king, the emperor thinking is so important. But then God tells him, and he makes him an animal. It's actually humor and the resistance also there, sort of the weapons of the weak is sort of very interesting there, sort of that his power is rendered, futile. So even he can perform as much as he can by saying, hereby I declare, hereby I do, but then the higher power comes and tell him actually, you're nothing in terms of that. So how the power struggles, but then also who gets to speak and who not. So there's also this in terms of, I mean, it's very interesting, the king, the God, but I mean, sort of the voiceless, and that goes to some of our gender conversations, the gender class, I mean, who has a voice, who gets to speak. So that would also be something interesting to think about. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, we see that there are these formulaic expressions that have already entrenched this power dynamic. I mean, the king just has to say this formulaic expression, and that already indicates how powerful it is. It is interesting then that when God speaks to the king, it's not this formulaic expression, but it's one of these active participle with just the normal stem of to speak, amar.
Okay.
Yeah.
So God doesn't even need that.
Maybe that's the
that's very interesting. Let me just quickly see if there's some other questions also from the people there. We'll see. Do you have a new question? Is it a new hand? Or
And I can also make this paper available.
Yes, you can definitely put it also in the chat. Yeah, so that would be good. So even the PowerPoint might be a good way to also do that. Maybe another question that I thought about. I actually read this. I mean, I love this how you start also by the context of the wedding, performing a wedding. Because and I can't remember what context I read this. I was reading so many different things, but I remember this one. Said in women's, I think it is sort of in terms of the Psalms. I think I read it there. You know, so there's a fascinating where she says, like, you can say, I mean, a little girl, Suzanne, can sort of say, marry her two teddies. And she can also say, I hereby declare you are now married. But it won't hold up in terms of, so it's also about the setting and the context in which it's said. And you know, that also comes up. I know where I read it. I can also send you that because I know it's in terms of Psalms and the formative also.
Well, it's also interesting that we read, I think last year, that human dignity is in a way actually performative, because you say that you respect someone's human right, and it only happens because of this act of saying, okay, we are now changing reality in a way whereby we respect each other. I hereby respect your human rights. I mean, So I'm struggling to upload the thing about.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll do this at just after 3 so then we can. Tristan, yes.
Just go to one of the examples. Make sure that what I'm going to use this.
I can go to the other one as well if that helps you.
Yeah. So you said it indicates change. But then the action is complete. So the action that is performed for the same declaration changes reality to it.
Exactly. Like this example, for instance, is by saying that he issues a decree, the kingdom has changed from not having to having this decree. And so by him saying, I hereby issue this decree to all treasurers in this case, then that his issuing this decree constitutes this change in reality, whereby now the treasurers have to abide by this decree, by the king. Does that make sense?
Yes. Forgive me if my questions are very.
No.
No. So when does that changing of events happen? Does it happen just before he declared it, or?
I mean, it's in the moment of speech.
But that goes against which is authority and who, because what king or the absolute emperor can say this is now that, and then I mean So it, yeah, also plays out in that.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Let me just go back to the, let me see if there's some others. Bosi, do you have another question or your hand's still up?
No.
No, so good. Okay. Anybody else? They see in the chat, is there something? Anybody else who wants to ask something or?
Hello, Judy.
Yes, Bosi, yes.
Yes.
Sorry. No.
I'm still struggling whether it is important to consider act and performance to be synonymous or just overlapping terms. I mean, does performance become almost too general if all acts which are expressed by verbs, etc., if all acts become performance? So is that something which you have pondered, and would that distinction have any relevance for your attempt to describe a certain progression within Aramaic?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So maybe let me go back to our framework, and our analysis was primarily linguistic, and so our framework did try to account for an empirical foundation. So the performatives as found in language. So I'm not sure that we necessarily looked at acts in themselves, but we did look at properties which are not purely grammatical. So looking at the context that something brings about in the world, in the narratives that we read, or the procedure that's necessarily not written in the text, but would be accompanied by performatives. So that's what I could respond with for now. But please, if I didn't understand your question correctly, feel free to ask again. Does that sort of answer to your concern?
No, thank you. I am still struggling with it myself.
Yeah.
As soon as you have clarity, please let me know. But thank you for a very, very stimulating paper.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question. I mean, because I do think, it has to do with context, it has to do with all these other factors, it has to do with ideology, it has to do, so, and I think, there's so many, which is not just purely linguistic, grammatical, that adds also onto. Yeah, and I think your pizza example is very interesting.
Yeah.
Sort of, because it does help to see the analogy and what, what factors goes into. You can of course flesh that out. I mean, yeah, in terms of, it's a very Western.
Yeah, it is a very Western.
But so just even thinking about some of those questions coming into. So
exactly. Yeah.
Any last? So online people. Then I think then I will just say thank you so much, Hans. I mean, it's really, I don't think I, in my third year, would have presented here before everyone. So really, I mean, this is next level. Thank you so much. And also your professor who pushed you to write and wrote with you, co-wrote. So I think that is wonderful. And Bosi, I can just also tell them actually Tristan and Hans, they are also talked to me about, they have some extracurricular writing project on sort of Avatar, Airbender, last Airbenders, bringing that conversation also with theology and trauma, hermeneutics, and so I don't think we give them enough work, but they are doing some very other interesting things also on the side, which is just lovely. Also, thank you so much. Next week, so my colleague Hendrik Bosman will present. So we will send out on Monday also the, sort of the more information also about that, but don't forget that. And then the week after that, we have a bonus. So for Lola Oluyedi, So my colleagues, so we are organizing this gender unit writing retreat, which ends with also then a mini conference. And so she will part of that week that we are organizing. She will present also in this space on Wednesday afternoon, her paper. I can't remember the title now, but it will send out the program. But then after that, it will be followed also by that evening by the launch of the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologian, which Lola is the South African coordinator. So we have a website that we've launched, and it's fantastic. It's a space where all circle women throughout Africa and contributing, and also the resources also being places sort of housed in the gender unit. So we're very excited about that. So that will be launched on Wednesday, so 2 weeks time, so the 22nd. So we are busy planning that. But in any case, so you will be invited to that. Most of it will be online, so people can sort of also, join in to that as well. Good. See you then next week. Thank you so much. Thanks, Hans. It was wonderful. Thank you.
So can do this sort of applause. Get my students to participate.
Thank you, Hans.
Thank you, Lola. Lola, email Estelle. Estelle's looking for you.
Bye. So thank you. Oh,
Thanks, bye.
Bye. I should have. I'm now just at. It's fine. Yeah. So. Are they leaving? It's fine. So we can send that. They will ask if they need it. So we did.